The party had been running for 90 minutes when Daniel Hayes finally found parking 3 blocks north on Fifth Avenue. Snow was coming down in the particular Manhattan way, not romantic, not cinematic, just relentless, turning the sidewalks gray before the plows could catch up. He'd brought a wool cap for Lucas, which the boy immediately lost, somewhere between the parking garage and the front steps of the Laurent townhouse. The building was all glass and poured concrete, the kind of architecture that announces power without apologizing for it. A red carpet ran from the iron gate to the front door. 2 men in black coats stood at the entrance, checking invitations against tablets. Daniel handed over his phone with the Evite and felt, not for the first time, slightly absurd attending a child's birthday party in a suit. He had not known what the appropriate dress code was for this particular event. The invitation had been passed through his EA, not given directly, and had erred on the side of overdressed rather than under, which was the professional calculus he usually applied. Lucas walked beside him with the particular seriousness of a 7-year-old who has been told twice to behave. He wore a clip-on tie. He had insisted on it, and Daniel had learned, 3 years into solo parenting, that some battles were not battles at all. They were just decisions the child had already made. The tie was green plaid. It did not match the gray of his jacket. Daniel had decided this was fine. Inside, the party occupied the entire ground floor and spilled into a glass-walled garden at the back, where heating lamps stood like orange sentinels against the cold. A string quartet played in one corner. Caterers moved through the crowd with trays of things Daniel did not recognize. He counted, roughly, 140 guests. He accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and scanned the room for colleagues. He spotted Renata Collier from legal near the garden doors and nodded. He found Marcus Webb from his own division talking to someone from investor relations. He did not see Alexandra Laurent anywhere, which was not surprising. She had a talent for being in a room without being immediately findable. Lucas tugged at his sleeve. Daniel looked down. His son was signing. "Over there." Daniel followed his gaze across the room, past the main buffet table, past a cluster of parents doing the stiff, small-talk thing that adults do at children's parties when there are no children nearby to anchor the conversation. Against the far wall, tucked beside a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf that appeared to contain actual books rather than decorative spines, sat 2 girls. They appeared to be identical twins, 8 years old, maybe 9. Both wore white dresses with silver trim that caught the chandelier light when they moved. Both had their dark hair pulled back in braids that someone had spent real time on, the kind of braids that require a mirror and patience, and a child willing to sit still. They sat close together, shoulders almost touching, watching the room with the specific alertness of children who are paying close attention to something that has nothing to do with what is happening around them. They were watching hands. When someone gestured while talking, both girls tracked the motion. When the quartet shifted to a new piece, louder, more percussive, neither reacted to the sound at all. They registered the shift through the vibration that moved through the floor, through the soles of their shoes, up through their legs. One of them pressed her palm flat against the bookshelf beside her, feeling the resonance in the wood. Lucas was already moving toward them. Daniel caught up to his son 3 paces from the girls. He put a hand on Lucas's shoulder, not to stop him, just a signal. "Let me be here too." Lucas crouched to eye level and signed, "Hi, I'm Lucas." The girl on the left looked up first. Something shifted in her expression, not quite surprise, more like the recognition of something she hadn't expected to find in this particular room. She signed back, small and precise, "Hi, I'm Elise." The girl on the right tilted her chin slightly. "Noelle." Daniel crouched beside his son. His knees were on the hardwood floor, which was cold and very clean. He signed, "Happy birthday. Are you having a good party?" Elise considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. She signed, "The cake is good. The music is too loud, but we can't hear it anyway." She said this without particular bitterness. It was information, not complaint. Noelle, who seemed to be the quieter of the two, added, "There are too many people we don't know." Daniel felt something in his chest, not pity, nothing condescending as that, something closer to recognition. He remembered a company retreat 4 years ago, standing on a deck in Vermont, watching other couples move with the effortless choreography of people who still had someone beside them, the feeling of being visible and invisible simultaneously. He signed, "Me too. I only know a few people here." Elise tilted her head. "You work with our mom?" He signed. "Yes, I work in strategy." "Noelle, what does strategy mean?" Lucas, who had positioned himself cross-legged on the floor between the two girls, with the social confidence that Daniel still found astonishing in a child, signed with the slightly loose grammar of a kid who learned the language at home. "It means he figures out what the company does next, like a chess player." Both girls looked at Daniel with new assessment. Chess was apparently a valid credential. Across the room, he became aware of being watched. He didn't look up yet. He kept his attention on the girls, on Lucas, on the conversation moving in the silent architecture of ASL across the 3 feet of floor between them. The 4 of them existed, for the duration of that conversation, in a bubble that the party moved around but did not enter. Alexandra Laurent had been standing near the bar for 4 minutes, holding a glass of champagne she had not touched, watching the man on the floor with her daughters. She knew who he was. Daniel Hayes, 37, head of strategic planning, hired 22 months ago from a competitor where he had restructured 3 underperforming divisions in 4 years. His performance reviews were clean and consistent. Rigorous, direct, no political games. He had a son. She knew that because HR files were part of what she read, and she read everything. She had also seen him in 17 meetings and spoken to him directly on 4 occasions, all of them professional. What she did not know, what no file had told her, was that he could sign. She watched his hands move. He was fluent, not performative. There was no hesitation, no self-consciousness. "No, of course. I know a few signs energy that she had encountered in the parade of well-meaning people who'd learned 3 words of ASL and expected to be commended for the effort." His hands moved the way people's hands move when they are thinking, not performing. The signs were economical and clear, the transition smooth. He was having a conversation, not a demonstration. Elise was laughing. It was a silent laugh. Her shoulders shook. Her eyes creased, but it was real, unguarded. The kind of laugh that children produce when something strikes them as genuinely funny rather than politely so. Daniel's son had apparently said something absurd. Elise was registering it fully. Alexandra set her champagne down on the bar and left it there. She had hired 4 different specialists since the twins' diagnosis at age 3. A speech-language pathologist, a deaf educator, an interpreter who attended school events. She had restructured her entire morning schedule to ensure the girls were at school by 8:15. She had done every recommended thing and several unrecommended things. She had not learned to sign. Not properly. She knew the alphabet and perhaps 40 signs from an app she'd used for 3 weeks before a crisis in Singapore had consumed 6 consecutive weekends, and the app had gone unopened long enough to have functionally disappeared. She told herself she would return to it. The intention had remained sincere and inert. Noelle was showing the boy Lucas something with her hands. He responded, and his response was apparently both unexpected and correct, because Noelle's expression opened into the particular delight of a child who has been taken seriously. Alexandra crossed the room. People moved slightly as she passed, not parting dramatically, just the small, unconscious adjustments that crowds make around a gravitational center. She reached the edge of the small circle and stopped. 4 pairs of eyes came up to meet her. Daniel Hayes looked up. He met her eyes without flinching, without the micro-adjustment of expression that most of her employees made when they suddenly found themselves face-to-face with the top of the org chart. The slight recalibration, the performance of composure. He just looked at her, then stood, unhurried. "Mr. Hayes," she said. "Miss Laurent." He glanced down at the girls, who were now watching their mother with the diplomatic neutrality children deploy when they are uncertain of the social weather. Happy birthday to them. Thank you. She paused 2 beats. I'd like a word. They moved to her study, a room off the main hallway that guests were not supposed to enter. She closed the door, the noise of the party reduced to a muffled pulse. The study was her real room. 2 walls of books, a standing desk, a chalkboard along one side on which someone had drawn a detailed architectural floor plan in blue chalk 3 months ago. She had not erased it. How long have you known ASL? She asked. He didn't seem surprised by the question. Claire, my wife, she taught at a school for the deaf in Queens. She started teaching Lucas when he was 2, just as a second language. After she died, I kept it up. He's better than I am. His vocabulary is larger. His spatial grammar is more natural. Alexandra stood by the window. Snow pressed against the glass. On the street below, a taxi was double parked and not moving. The driver was on a phone call, visible through the windshield, gesturing with one hand while the other held the wheel. How long ago? She asked. 3 years. She registered this without comment. 3 years of parenting alone. She knew something about the arithmetic of that, not the grief. She had not lost a spouse. She had removed one from the equation rather than had one removed, which was a different kind of calculation. But the specific weight of being the only adult in a house with children who needed things in the full spectrum of human need, not just the categories she was equipped for. My daughter's school program has an interpreter for in-class communication, she said. I have an interpreter for family events when I remember to schedule one. Tonight, I did not remember. She said this the way she said most things steadily, with no particular emphasis on the admission. The MC was not briefed. The music program had no visual component. There were no captions on the video presentation that ran at the beginning of the party. She looked at him. They've been at that wall since the formal portion started. Approximately 90 minutes. I know, he said. How long were you watching before your son went over? Lucas noticed first. A pause. 60 seconds, maybe. He started moving, and I followed. She nodded once. The study was quiet. Somewhere in the house, a burst of children's laughter penetrated the walls and then faded back into the general sound. I don't want gratitude to become awkward in a professional context, she said. So I'll say it once and move on. Thank you for noticing and for not making it a scene. You don't have to say that. I know I don't. She turned back to the window. I'm saying it because it's accurate. Richard Calloway had spent 31 years on various boards and had developed, over that time, an almost clinical sensitivity to the human dynamics that preceded institutional problems. He noticed when a CEO laughed too quickly at a subordinate's joke. He noticed posture shifts. Eye contact held a beat too long. He noticed the 6-minute gap in Alexandra Laurent's presence at her own daughter's birthday party, and the man she had pulled aside when she returned. He had reviewed the personnel files of the top 24 Laurent Global employees before joining the board. He knew who Daniel Hayes was. He mentioned it, carefully, to Gwen Farrar at the bar. Gwen was on the governance committee and protective of Laurent in the way women of her generation were sometimes protective of younger women in rooms historically built without them. She was talking to someone from her team, Gwen said. At her children's birthday party, he said. Privately, for 6 minutes. Richard. Her voice was dry. She is allowed 6 minutes. He did not push it, but he filed it. 3 days later, at a brief governance committee call, he mentioned it as a footnote. Gwen called him afterward and told him to let it rest. He let it rest for approximately 8 weeks. It started as her idea, which was important she would think of it that way later, when things became complicated, and the thinking of it that way would be accurate and would matter to her in a way that was difficult to articulate. She sent the email on a Monday morning, 2 weeks after the party. Subject line: ASL Instruction Informal Arrangement. She wanted to learn properly. She was willing to compensate him at an hourly consulting rate outside his regular contract. She would appreciate a direct answer. He replied in 2 sentences. "I can do Tuesday evenings if that works." She had written back that she didn't accept uncompensated labor from employees. He hadn't responded to that message. She had let it stand. They met at the penthouse closer to the girls, and she didn't want to be more than 6 minutes from them on weekday evenings. He arrived at 7, after Lucas was at his neighbor Diane's for dinner, and left by 9, before the girls' bedtime routine entered its final phase. The first session was almost purely technical. She was methodical and unsentimental in her approach to learning, notebook open, objectives defined, no patience for imprecision in herself. He taught without condescension and without excessive encouragement, which she found she preferred. Encouragement, in a learning context, often meant the teacher was compensating for something. The second session, she made fewer notes and began to rely on repetition and correction. He corrected without hesitation when she was wrong, simply the correct form. Demonstrated, with a beat of silence to allow her to absorb it. The third session, midway through a sequence on time expressions tomorrow, last week. In a few minutes, Elise appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, hair unbraided, holding a book she was pretending she needed. She watched them for a moment from the threshold. Then she walked in, stood beside Daniel, and signed with the cool authority of someone who has always been the expert in the room, a correction to his hand shape for the word tomorrow. His wrist rotation, she indicated, was slightly off. He accepted the correction without comment. He redid the sign. Elise watched, assessed, and gave a single nod. Then she signed to her mother. "You're getting better." She said this with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone reporting a weather observation rather than offering praise. Coming from Elise, who distributed compliments the way central banks distribute currency sparingly, and only when the underlying fundamentals could support it. This landed with unexpected weight. Alexandra signed back, slower than she wanted, the hand shapes still requiring conscious effort. "Thank you for teaching me." Elise looked at her for a moment, then she went back to bed. She took the book with her, which suggested the book had never been the real reason she came. Daniel said nothing. He picked up the next item in the lesson sequence. Alexandra was grateful for the absence of comment. The formal pressure arrived on a Thursday in late February, at the end of a governance committee meeting that had run 40 minutes over schedule. Calloway waited until the others had left. Then he said, with the precision of a man who has thought about how to say something for several weeks, "There's a perception issue. Among some of the institutional shareholders and 2 governance members, the concern is optics, specifically, the proximity between you and a direct report in what are being characterized as personal contexts." Alexandra let a beat pass. "Define personal. The birthday event, and reports of regular evening meetings at your residence. He is providing me with ASL instruction so that I can communicate with my deaf children," she said. "That is the totality of what is occurring." "I believe you," Calloway said. He said this without evident irony. The board's concern is not about what is occurring. It is about what can be inferred and how that inference might affect our position with certain investors who watch these things closely and have, historically, reacted to ambiguity by reducing their exposure. She looked at him steadily. "What are you asking me to do? Formalize the distance, a transfer to a sister division, or simply allow the current arrangement to conclude naturally? It's a reasonable request, given the circumstances and the institutional relationships at stake. He is the best strategic planner in this company," she said. His work on the Meridian account contributed 11 points to last quarter's performance. Transferring him damages us operationally to manage a perception problem that is, in my judgment, not real. I understand that. But the board needs to protect the institution from risks that extend beyond individual performance metrics. "From what, exactly?" she said. Not a question. A request that he say it plainly. He didn't, he said. "Think about it." "That's all I'm asking." He gathered his things and left with the efficiency of a man who considers an uncomfortable conversation to have concluded once he has said what he came to say. She thought about it for approximately 18 hours. Then she did something she had not planned to do, which was tell Daniel Hayes exactly what had been said, because he had a right to information that bore directly on his position in the company. She told him on a Tuesday, not a lesson evening. She called him into her office at 4 in the afternoon. With the door open. The door would remain open. She told him plainly. She did not dress it up or soften the framing. She relayed what Calloway had said with the same economy she used in board presentations. The concern, the framing of it, the ask. She gave him the direct version. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to continue the arrangement and disregard the pressure," she said. "But I'm telling you because it's your position that's at risk, not mine. And you have a right to that information and to whatever decision follows from it." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass wall of her office, the floor ran at normal volume keyboards, phone calls, ambient sound of work. "There's a third option," he said. She waited. "I submit a voluntary transfer request. Not because of pressure, because the strategic planning function would genuinely be more effective with operational independence from the CEO's direct reporting line. I've drafted that proposal 3 times in the last year. Shelved it each time because the political moment wasn't right and I didn't want it to look like self-promotion." He paused. "If I put it through now, it solves the board's problem as a byproduct of something structurally correct. The two things don't have to be in conflict." "That's not a compromise," she said. "That's you carrying the institutional cost of a problem that isn't yours. The structural argument is real," he said. "You can verify that independently. It's not something I'm constructing to resolve this." She was quiet for a moment. He was right. The case for an independent strategic operations division had circulated in planning discussions before he was hired, and no one had moved it forward because the organizational will hadn't been present, and no one had pushed with sufficient persistence. "I'll need the proposal formally," she said. "Full documentation. I'm not approving something that looks like it was assembled in response to board pressure. You'll have it by Friday." She nodded. He left. She sat with it for a long moment before returning to the other things on her desk, which were numerous. The proposal arrived Friday at 8:17 in the morning. 31 pages, including appendices. The structural argument was sound. The precedent analysis was thorough. The efficiency projections were conservatively stated, which she found more persuasive than inflated numbers would have been. She read it twice. The Q1 planning session was held in the main conference room on the 32nd floor, with 16 people around the table and 4 dialed in remotely. Alexandra had distributed the restructuring proposal 2 days prior, without commentary, and let people form preliminary views before she framed anything. Calloway had read it, she could tell. He sat at the far end of the table with the specific stillness of someone who is recalibrating, not surprised exactly, but reassessing the geometry of a situation he thought he'd understood. She presented the proposal as what it was, a structural improvement to the strategic planning function, recommended by the head of that function, consistent with industry best practice at comparable firms. She cited 3 external examples. She showed the projected efficiency gains and the transition timeline. She was 18 minutes, which was her target. She did not rush and did not over-explain. Then she said, "I want to be direct about the context. Some members of this board have raised concerns about the proximity between myself and the head of strategy in what were characterized as personal settings. Those settings were American Sign Language instruction sessions. I have been learning ASL so that I can communicate with my daughters without an interpreter present. Mr. Hayes, who was fluent, was providing that instruction. The room was quiet. Calloway did not move. I am not presenting this restructuring as a concession to those concerns," she continued. "I am presenting it because the proposal is correct on its merits, and because the person who wrote it is the appropriate person to lead the resulting division. But I want it on the record. The suggestion that an employee should be transferred or otherwise disadvantaged because a CEO was learning to talk to her own children is not a governance concern I will take seriously in the future. She stopped there. She did not look at Calloway. Gwen Farrar said quietly, "Noted." The restructuring proposal passed with 11 votes in favor, 3 abstentions, and 2 opposed, the same 2 who opposed most structural changes, regardless of content. Afterward, in the elevator, Calloway said, "You could have done that without the editorial." "Yes," she agreed. "I chose not to." The elevator reached the lobby. They went their separate ways. The new office was in Brooklyn, in a converted warehouse space in Red Hook with good natural light and manageable parking. The Strategic Operations Division had 11 people, a budget that reported to the CFO rather than directly to the CEO's office, and a clear mandate. Daniel had his team operating at full capacity within 60 days. The Tuesday evenings had not formally ended. They had evolved, less structured, less frequent, shaped more by what the girls wanted to work on than by a fixed lesson plan. Elise had decided, sometime around November, that she was the primary instructor and that both her mother and Daniel were students. This reorganized the dynamic in a way that seemed to suit everyone. The twins' 9th birthday fell on a Saturday in February. The party was at the penthouse again, but smaller, 12 children from school, a few adults, a cake from the bakery on 73rd that the girls had chosen themselves after a formal tasting process that had apparently involved considerable deliberation and at least one diplomatic impasse over frosting. There was no string quartet. Someone had put together a playlist that ran through a Bluetooth speaker at low volume, mostly for the adults. The girls didn't need it. Lucas arrived with Daniel at 11 in the morning. He was 8 now, 2 inches taller, and he had the easy familiarity of a child who has been somewhere enough times to know which rooms are acceptable to be in without asking. He went immediately to the kitchen, where Noelle was organizing party favor bags with focused seriousness. Daniel stood near the window with a coffee. The snow outside was light and intermittent, the kind of snow that suggests winter is making a final polite effort before conceding to spring. The city through the glass was in its Saturday register slower, less pressurized, the streets running at 2/3 of their weekday intensity. Alexandra came to stand beside him. She was wearing a gray sweater and no jewelry. He had come to understand, over the course of the past year, that this was her version of dressed down, not casual exactly, but stripped of the external architecture she wore in professional contexts. "Division's quarterly review is next week," she said. "Marcus has the slides. I've seen them. They're solid. Good." She watched the snow. A comfortable beat of silence. "Elise told me last night that she wants to apply to the Westfield program next fall. The one in Connecticut?" He'd heard her mention it once, in passing. Residential. 2 semesters. She told me herself, signed the whole case across the dinner table. Criteria for why she wants it. What the logistics would require. A list of what she'd need from me specifically to make it work. She'd thought it through. Alexandra paused. It was the longest sustained conversation we've had without an interpreter since the diagnosis. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at the snow. "That's the first time? Without anyone between us?" "Yes." The snow came down in soft, irregular intervals outside the glass. Across the room, Noelle had apparently approved Lucas's contribution to the favor bag situation and had moved on to the more pressing matter of balloon placement, which involved handing Lucas a significant quantity of balloons, a roll of tape, and a clear spatial directive, and then watching with an expression that suggested she had calibrated her expectations accordingly. "She'll get in," Daniel said. "I know." They stood there a little while longer, in the particular quiet of 2 people who have run out of professional topics. Outside, a pigeon landed on the window ledge, regarded them briefly through the glass, and left. Elise came in from the hallway at speed, registered them both by the window, and signed to her mother without breaking stride. "The caterer wants to know where to put the extra chocolate layer." Alexandra signed back without hesitation, without the half-second lag that had characterized her signing for most of the previous year. kitchen table. Tell them thank you. Elise pivoted and went back the way she'd come. The exchange had taken 8 seconds. No interpreter, no pause, no translation layer between a mother and her daughter, just two people talking. Daniel drank his coffee. Alexandra watched the doorway her daughter had just walked through. She corrected your hand shape again, he said. Last week. The sign for patience. I know, she was right. Alexandra's voice was level. She usually is. From across the room came the sound of something falling, not a crash, more a cascade, followed by Lucas's voice announcing with perfect composure that the balloon situation was technically under control. Noelle appeared in the doorway between the living room and the hallway, assessed the situation with a look that communicated a full paragraph of opinion in about 3 seconds, and signed to the room at large. He needs help. Daniel set down his coffee. I'll go. He crossed the room to where his son was standing in a modest catastrophe of escaped balloons, perhaps 20 of them, drifting at various heights across the living room ceiling, and the two of them began the work of recovery. They passed tape and balloons back and forth with the easy coordination of people who have solved enough small problems together to skip the negotiation stage. Lucas anchored and Daniel taped. Within 6 minutes, the situation was resolved and arguably better than what Noelle had originally envisioned. Noelle watched them work. Then she looked across the room at her mother, who was still standing by the window. She signed, small and precise, the sign directed only at Alexandra. I like when they come over. Alexandra looked at her daughter. She signed back clean, the hand shapes right, the movement unhurried. I do too. Noelle considered this with the gravity she brought to most things. Then she nodded once and turned back to supervise the final balloon assessment. Outside, the snow continued. The room was warm. No one was at the wall.